Um, Shout out to Abby for being fucking insane enough
to like this shit.
I know. Before I get stopped in public one more time and somebody tells me I'm too harsh on Jaden Smith, I gotta tell you, I've tried for the last 3 years, since 2016, since I heard him. Even before that, when he dropped that one single where he was flexing his arm at like 13, I've followed the young man and I've tried to give him respect. Back when he thought that song Kicks Like Me was a good idea, I watched him evolve through tracks like Labor Volume 2 or Version 2, and I was like, this dude sounds like he's got some hope. He's got a nice voice, it isn't shrouded by anything, he's got some intensity to him. He might have something in the future. Then we got SYRE, and that kind of dropped my hope. See, my main issue with SYRE isn't necessarily that it's just, you know, kind of inspired by so many others. One of my main issues with SYRE really was just how, if you didn't like Jaden Smith or you didn't really care to know that much about him, he decided to make an album about himself, but attempting to be conceptual about it. And in the album, it's just filled with these worlds that he's created because his actual reality is filled with the reality that none of us are actually accustomed to. I think the Sunset Tapes was just a malnourished version of SYRE to me in retrospect. And now we have his new tape here called ERYS. I just want to call it ERYS. And as usual, Jaden Smith has this trend that I really hope he continues with as he continues to drop more albums and more music. This color. The first one is blue and the second one is pink. The first one that showed up on SYRE was really open, really otherworldly, pretty cinematic, very large, very big. You could hear it in the production, and he really wanted to make this grand entrance. After hearing the entire project, I've really come to the conclusion that Jaden Smith would probably be better off releasing these little color intros as just their own EPs, because they're far more entertaining than what we usually get on the rest of the project. It was the same case with SYRE, and I think it's the same case with ERYS. Pink here is equally as cinematic, just slightly darker to kind of fit the tone of the narrative that Jaden is trying to go for with this ERYS character. This ERYS character is supposed to be a representation of a guy who's kind of living in a post-apocalyptic version of Los Angeles, and he's kind of the leader of things. And I really would respect that conceptual decision-making process if the character was actually fleshed out, detailed, thoughtful, provoking in some way, but he just isn't. He's kind of like a guy that watched one of the Twilight movies and never kind of grew out of that phase. I do think the production choices and the style that Jaden Smith uses over his voice, the effects, do kind of help to represent this character as a darker personality or an anti-hero to the quote-unquote main character on SYRE. His voice is sometimes really low in pitch, sometimes muffled, sometimes distorted, and sometimes that helps to fit the theme of this futuristic, dark, very hopeless world that he's trying to set the stage for. But that aesthetic only makes sense during the pink portion of the project, because after that, it's a bunch of musical detours inspired by everyone else that Jaden Smith listens to. But I do want to touch on how lush and open and grand and beautiful the production is during the start of the album, because I don't want to skip over that, it being one of the things that if Jaden were to ever stumble across one of these videos, I would love for him to steal the idea of just making these colors mini EPs and dropping those instead. The more and more I listen to this project, the more and more I'm just less interested in the character that he's trying to portray. If I barely know about or care about Jaden Smith, what the fuck makes you think I want to sit through an hour of him explaining himself in an alternative universe? I'm basically listening to an alter ego to Jaden Smith, a dude with so little thought conceptually that in order to create another album, he had to slightly alter the path of a character that he had already made. This isn't a continuation of that character, it's just a split or a branch off of the same shit. If you know anything about creating characters for a series, you know the anti-hero isn't much different than the actual hero, but Jaden Smith tries to portray this character in so much more of a darker way. But that never really works because these lyrics and these songs still feel like very Jaden Smith-esque, so they don't really feel like they're coming from this alternative character. It still feels like just this mood change from Jaden Smith. It seems like this character was his excuse to emulate all the people that he loves from good music, because it sounds really Kanye, really Kid Cudi, really Travis Scott, and that excuse of this being a darker alternative character gives him the reason to muffle and lower and auto-tune his voice and all these other weird effects that, in my opinion, he sounds much better without. The character of ERYS that Jaden Smith props up on this pedestal, both intellectually and based off their own importance, literally crumbles because his lack of ideas and concept and songwriting here makes the character just seem like, why? Why did we need a whole album about another you? This is just Jaden's way of saying, if something crazy happened to Los Angeles, I'd want to lead the new generation and not sound crazy for it. This dude has a song featuring himself. I do like, again though, because it's kind of woozy, it's kind of open, and he's not really doing auto-croon for majority of it. I just want y'all to explain to me at what level I'm actually supposed to enjoy this album to like the highest degree. Am I supposed to look at him and say, oh shit, this character is odd, it's different from Jaden, and I should appreciate it? I can't, because he's not giving me any depth to work with, as his lyrics are very reminiscent of what I would get from just Jaden Smith himself. Am I supposed to look at this as something great because of the singing? I can't, because he's average at best. There's some breaks here where I think he might go into some new territory, like at the end of K, where he uses these clippers as kind of like an instrumental, and I think it's really creative, but he uses these drums to kind of give himself a safety net. It's like he exposes this moment of creativity, this break where he might do something slightly experimental, which is kind of the vibe and aesthetic he's trying to paint for this entire record, him being experimental and adding elements of rock and elements of hip hop into the same song and trying to make himself seem like this creative genius for doing so. Moments like this where he actually shows some nice experimentation reminds me of groups like Clipping, where they use an alarm clock on the track Get Up as the instrumental foundation for the track. But Jaden Smith is like so insecure as a rapper that he goes back into what the average trap artist would do to kind of shroud their lack of substance in anything. But again, that wouldn't normally be my complaint about a project like this if it was aware of the lack of substance that it actually offers. Jaden Smith reminds me of J. Cole in the sense that the instrumental palettes that they use for the foundation of their tracks are already reminiscent of the landscape that a lot of us listen to. But the difference between the two is J. Cole, as far as a rapper and a writer, has actually improved over the years, whereas Jaden Smith seems to go deeper into this thought process of people don't get it, and I'm on this new level, I'm on this new wave, I'm doing some shit no one's done before, I'm on some brave shit, and it makes you pay attention to the album way more than you naturally would just having a normal interaction with music. If there wasn't this obvious reference to this side character that he's emulating, I would have really no reason to bark at this project. But it having such an overarching concept and it falling so short with any kind of depth or any kind of instrumental cloud to float on that's different than the landscape or Jaden Smith's playlist, it just dampens the mood of the entire thing for me. The features on this project are just okay. I enjoy Lito's contribution to the track K. I somewhat like or can understand why Tyler, the creator, is rapping the way he's rapping, though it does sound a little odd. I guess it's okay. Willow, A$AP Rocky, and Kid Cudi perform as you would expect them to. In more ways than one, ERYS just comes across like an underwritten anime character. One that seems like Jaden Smith is building up to have a massive confrontation with the SYRE character that he built up in 2017, and I really hope that's not where this is going. Even at the worst moments, Jaden writes this ERYS character as if it's a selfless individual that cares more about the world that he's in than himself. One that's concerned only with the forwarding of the new generation and less concerned about the forwarding of himself. But there's so little on this project that's thought-provoking or insightful. Who could you really be leading? It's basically like getting a Happy Meal being served at a 5-star restaurant or having a $250 million budget for a Rugrats film. And then I feel like I'm being chastised at moments in the album because Jaden will make it seem like you're weird for liking certain types of music but delivering the exact same type of fucking music. I understand why people like it. I understand why people like Jaden Smith. But to me, it's just like an attempt at being artsy while having zero substance or anything to add to the market you're emulating. The album sounds more like Jaden Smith's playlist because there are styles emulated all throughout the entire record that you just cannot get away from. I think if this dude goes back to his roots, his basics, stop trying to shroud himself in this overproduction and just kind of live with himself as opposed to a character he created for the musical consumption of his fan base, I think he might pull something a little bit more interesting together, something a little bit more introspective. Because the cuts on here that are somewhat tolerable, like even Somebody Else, I think contain some pretty nice singing, at least something tolerable, something as a nice contrast to the very synthetic shit that we got all throughout this project. I don't know, the album just comes off like this pseudo-intellectual take on people finally coming into the knowledge that you have an emotional side and a logical side, and sometimes the two collide. I still want to give Jaden credit for his activism, well, his support of the community and his humanitarian efforts, because I really like how he contributes so much to the world and he really does want to give back. But just take more time with the music, in my opinion, just so it can sound more fleshed out and a little bit more creative. Thank you for watching. Jaden Smith with this new ERYS album, kind of boring, and that's it. I'm out. Peace.